Hello, so today we will study if there is a meaning of life, if there is a reason why we're here on earth, if there is a purpose of our life. So it is not directly linked with personality traits, but it is linked with the evolution of personality. And in this context, it implies some pressure on some aspects of personality in order to make them evolve. So why are we here? Because there is a process of evolution in life. There is a process of development, of becoming, and this process appears in the universe, appears in history, and appears in the history of an individual. That is to say that we move as living beings, as a species, and as individuals, we move from a state of deep unconsciousness, like the case of rocks, of trees, of rivers, etc., to a state of higher and higher consciousness, like simple animals, more complex animals, and then human, etc. So would suggest that the meaning of life is for the universe to become fully aware of itself, and it implies a process of becoming more and more conscious, and this is the meaning of life. So what does it imply for our lives? It implies that well-being is not the essence of what we should aim for and search. That is not to say that we should discard well-being and neglect it, but we shouldn't gauge our success only towards well-being, although I think that at the end there is a kind of bliss of attaining a higher and deeper states of consciousness. So what does it mean to develop the consciousness? It means first to be more and more objective. So the impulse of the universe is to know itself, and this implies not being caught in subjective views, but being more and more objective. And this implies also, therefore, being more and more rational, that is, having a critical mind in order not to adhere to views of one's culture, of one's family, of one's group. It implies going beyond myths, going beyond one's tribe, going beyond the political or religious beliefs of one's family and of one's group, and using one's reason, which was given to us by nature, in order to being more and more objective and neutral and impersonal. And second, about personality, I would suggest that very high conscious people also have a very developed and specific and original personality. So becoming impersonal doesn't mean you don't have any personality. It means you are an original thinker, you have original points of view, and you have new ways of saying things. And the contrary of originality is unconsciousness. So a person who is very original, not by trying to differentiate oneself, but by trying to understand things and trying to not believing what he or she was taught, will become very original. So we see this in Jesus, we see this in the Buddha, we see this in Lao Tzu, we see this in Socrates, we can also see this in various sages from antiquity. We can see this in sages in modern epoch, such as Spinoza, for example. So we see this in all persons who are very developed. And the second aspect of development is becoming more and more free, becoming more and more autonomous, not being determined either by pre-existing culture or by impulsions, but seeing the good and wanting to act from the point of view of an objective good and not from the point of view of impulsions which could control us. So it is abandoning the ego being an intermediary state between a kind of impersonality which is one of the animal and a kind of impersonality which is one of the sage. So the ego is specifically human consciousness, and I would even say average human consciousness, because very low developed human don't have a very strong ego because they are caught in representations which don't come from them, such as in primitive tribes or such as in the case of infants and kids. But also I would say that the peak of the ego is like the average human being, and especially like in the teenagers, which don't take the others that much into account, which don't try to be very objective, and it often lasts during adulthood. But the principle of adulthood is going beyond one's subjectivity and going beyond one's ego and impulsivity, and trying to act according to truth and according to the good. So I would say that the meaning of life is becoming more and more conscious, which implies becoming more and more aware of oneself, becoming more and more aware of the universe, understanding oneself and the universe, and acting from a place of goodness, that is equalizing oneself and others, and not considering oneself more important than the rest, and being more and more impersonal. And we could even say that it implies becoming a god in some sense, because we develop more and more a consciousness which would be this consciousness that God would have if he would incarnate in a human body. So this is the philosophia perennis, that we ought to become like a god. And I think this is the essence of life, and maybe that God is only the full potential of the universe, becoming fully aware of itself, and that the universe and God are the same things, but God is the universe having become aware of itself, and the universe is the same thing but in a state of unawareness. And human beings, I would say, have an intermediate positions, and each individual evolves on a line from the unconsciousness of rocks and crystals to the full consciousness of God. And this is the meaning of life. This is what we should aim for, I think. And this implies for the personality, if we make a link with the Big Five, to be more open, to be more agreeable, to be more conscientious in order to foresee the consequences of what we do. I would say it implies to find a balance in extraversion between being alone and seeing others, and it implies not grasping too much to an ego, to a self-image, and so it implies lowering progressively neuroticism. I would say that neuroticism, it's at its highest at the ego phase, and it decreases with wisdom. but it also increases with becoming a human because of the problem of the ego. So thank you for listening.